Hello, welcome back to the channel. We talk horror here. If that's something you enjoy, please consider liking and subscribing. Today we're going to talk about Scanners, which might be my favorite David Cronenberg film. I know it's not his best because when you go back to it, it very much feels like he was still honing his craft while making the film. The acting is a little uneven, and there are still some concepts that don't really feel fully realized, but God damn, its 80s dystopian sci-fi vibes are just immaculate. It's a film that would make a great double feature with something like The Terminator or RoboCop. But then you also have the sort of grotesque body horror, which was a staple of Cronenberg's films at the time. It's a unique little sci-fi horror film that, up until last week, I had not seen the sequels to. Now, after watching all five of these films, I have some thoughts on this whole franchise. But before we get into any specific films, I want to talk a little bit about the franchise as a whole. Scanners takes place in a world where women in the 1950s were given this experimental drug. That drug ended up giving their children telekinetic superpowers that they call scanning. Most of these films follow a similar structure where a main character who has recently discovered that they have powers are either chased, captured, or entrapped by some sort of organization. And usually the climax of the film will have a good scanner fighting an evil scanner in some sort of body horror showdown. I think the main issue I have with these movies is that they were never really able to have like a really engaging protagonist. In the third one, they kind of flipped the script a little bit and made the main character the villain, and that's actually really fun. But in all the other ones, the main character sort of feels like a generic RPG character. One that you would see if you just hit new game and the character creation screen shows up and it's just a generic white dude. There's not really anything interesting about these guys except for the fact that they have scanning abilities. Another thing that I thought was lacking in the franchise as a whole was the fact that they never really quite explain what a scanner can and can't do. In the original, I actually think it works to the movie's benefit, where we are finding out what the scanners can do along with the characters in the movie. But there is a scene towards the end where the main character scans a computer, and it's a little hokey because they've only just been doing like mind control and telekinetic stuff up until that point. But it's also really intriguing. It's this moment where you realize that the scanners are actually way more powerful than you might have initially thought. I think the sequels kind of took the wrong lessons from that though, and made it so that the scanning can be whatever it is convenient for it to be at that time in the movie. Scanners 2 and 3 were essentially shot back to back and both released in 1991, 10 years after the original. They both have the same director and a lot of the crew worked on both films. I actually think it's pretty interesting because the movies themselves have very little to do with one another. 2 follows the tone and structure of the original pretty closely, while the third one goes in an absolutely bonkers direction. The third one is essentially a dark comedy, and it's by far my favorite of the sequels, but Scanners 2 is not awful. It's just a little boring. I'm not going to bother recapping the plot because it has a very similar plot to the original, but I want to highlight the scene where the main protagonist and his girlfriend are in this corner shop and it gets robbed. And this is, of course, the first time he shows anyone that he has scanning abilities because he has to protect himself and his girlfriend. What follows is absolute carnage in this little shop, with shelves being knocked over, people flying into walls, and heads exploding. It's the best part of the movie, and sadly it happens pretty early on. Another thing that I think is interesting about the second one is that the main villain is the police chief of the town that they are in. And considering how they went in a completely opposite direction with the Scanner Cop movies that came a little bit later, in those one the cops are the good guys. I don't know, it's just interesting to me. Like, Scanners 2 felt very anti-establishment and anti-cop in a way that I really appreciated, but overall it's not really a great movie. Scanners 3, however, is an absolute banger. It starts with a text crawl explaining what scanners are, and it's the only one of these films that actually feels like it's continuing the world from the original movie. In the world of Scanners Free, everyone knows what a scanner is. So people are like scanning each other as cool party tricks. There's a monastery in Thailand that a character goes to like study the art of controlling your scanning abilities. Big pharmaceutical companies are advertising drugs that suppress the side effects of scanning. The daughter of a CEO of one of these big pharmaceutical companies is a scanner, and she begins taking an experimental drug that is essentially like a nicotine patch. She just sticks it behind her ear, and it's supposed to help her with migraines that are related to scanning, but instead it just instantly turns her evil. And so begins her quest to take over the world. It's a wild fucking movie, and I think what I like the most about it is that it does not really take itself very seriously. It's also very fast-paced, and there's a lot of action in it, so it feels like the sequel with the most budget. I don't know if that's actually true, but that's what it feels like. There's lots of great head explosions in this one, chase sequences, and a deliciously cheesy performance from the film's leading lady, Liliana Komarovska. She's fantastic in the film. I no slight to her for the performance being cheesy. It's exactly what the movie needed, by the way. Just wanted to throw that in there. I highly recommend this one, and it's by far my favorite of the sequels. Scanners Free doesn't necessarily end on a cliffhanger, but it's pretty clear that it has a setup for future sequels, and it ultimately led nowhere because instead they decided to do a spin-off movie, Scanner Cop. It was released in 1995, and it was directed by Pierre David, who had previously produced the first three Scanner films. Scanner Cop is one of those movies that is more interesting than good. I was fully on board with this film for the first 15 minutes or so. I actually think the opening is quite excellent. There's this guy who's like hearing voices in his head, and as the voices become louder and louder, faces start popping out of his forehead. Like, it looks a little cheesy, but it's also, I don't know, it's also awesome. Like, it's a great opening. He's locked in this bathroom, and there's this kid on the other side of the door who you very quickly find out is his son, and he's like banging on the door. And then as soon as the son is able to get into the bathroom, of course, there's no faces on this guy's forehead anymore. And I don't know, I just thought it was a neat visual representation of this guy losing his mind because of the scanning abilities. A little later, police rush into the apartment, killing the dad after a fight, and we also find out that the son has scanning abilities. One of the police officers end up taking in this boy, and the boy grows up to be our titular Scanner Cop. All the problem with this film starts after the prologue, because like the second movie, this main character has no charisma whatsoever. It is also a movie that like hints at very interesting ideas, but never fully goes there. It's very ambitious, which I applaud. It just didn't go all the way for me. The story is basically a police procedural where someone is making innocent people turn against the cops. I forget how quickly it is revealed how this is happening, so I'm not going to spoil how they do it, but essentially people are being mind controlled to kill cops. So the plot is quite different in this one, and the death scenes where like all of a sudden people just become cop killers, they're really entertaining and kind of ridiculous. The mystery is also engaging all throughout. So by no means did I hate this movie. It's an okay way to waste an hour and a half, but it just could have been so much more. I actually think if they ever do like a remake or update of Scanners, they should incorporate some ideas from the Scanner Cop films. There's a point in this film where the main character is asked to scan a person in a coma, and he refuses to do so, both because of his own health, like he's scared what will happen if he starts scanning people again, but also because he feels like it's morally wrong. However, 10 more minutes go by, and then there's another murder in the film, and so he just changes his mind. I don't know, it just feels like the film has a lot of interesting ideas, but only manages to scratch the surface of any of them. It's still a fun movie, though. Scanner Cop 2, however, is by far the worst in the franchise, and I understand why they stopped making these after seeing it. It feels very bare bones and cheap compared to the other films. It might not come across as well in like pictures or clips, but the first thing I noticed was the abysmal acting, and I was actually a little surprised because they bring back the same guy from the first Scanner Cop film, and he still has no charisma, but in the first Scanner Cop film I thought he was fine. In this one he's like just god awful, along with pretty much everyone else in the cast. It's just so much worse than the original Scanner Cop.
Can I take you to dinner? To say thanks?
Dinner?
I got an emergency call. Guess tonight's just not my night.
The story also feels very rushed and not as all as well thought out as the first Scanner Cop. In this one, we're very much back to the standard story of like, here's an evil scanner, here's a good scanner, now they have to fight. But in this one, the evil scanner isn't even backed by some shadowy organization. It's just a dude being evil because he wants to steal people's life force, which is apparently a thing people can do in this film. I don't know. It just feels like a really weird thing to introduce in the 5th film of the franchise. Like, okay, scanners are vampires now. It's just, I don't know. It's weird. The one thing I hear people praise about this film, and it's sort of like, this is the reason to see this one, is because of the movie's special effects. But I don't really think they're as entertaining as the other entries in the franchise. In the scenes where the evil scanner takes people's life force, he sort of drains them of all their energy, right? But it never really felt believable to me. Like, it's very clear that they are cutting back and forth between this guy staring very intensely at the camera, and then they are placing different dummies made up to look like bodies in different stages of decomposing. It's just one of those movies where you can see the moving strings all throughout it. But honestly, that's not even my main complaint with the film. And my main complaint is that it's so bare bones. There's so little going on script-wise. So for that reason and for the bad acting, I think you can skip Scanner Cop 2. But watch the rest of them. They all have some merit to them, except for the last one, Scanner Cop 2. I did not enjoy that one. Thanks for sticking with me. I appreciate every single one of you watching this channel. Please tell me what you thought about Scanners. Have you seen any of the sequels? Tell me in the comments. I love to have a conversation about these films because I do think a lot of them are very, very interesting, even though they're not all great, I guess is what I'm trying to say. But I had fun. I had fun with this. So this is definitely a series that I want to continue. Maybe watch some more sequels to films I love. Okay, with that being said, I'll see you guys next time. Bye.